Welcome back. Today I'm going to once again analyze my lichess rapid game from last night. This game, at least the end of it, was really exciting, and I'm going to start near the end here where we each have more than 20 moves left, but if you can see my clock, I only have 46.9 seconds. My opponent has 1 minute and 8 seconds left. This is in a 10-minute rapid game with no increment, and here the evaluation was 0.1. I am slightly up on material at this point because I have an extra pawn. I was pretty sure that earlier in the game my opponent had a big advantage. I knew here that I was down on time, so I was just moving as quickly as possible, and I'm just going to play through the last 20-something moves here because we were moving very quickly here. I don't know how to play it in real time from a certain point, but that was a blunder, but here I suddenly have a +3 plus something advantage. My opponent did that, and I blocked that rook in. I checked, they came down, and now I have 16 seconds left. My opponent has 32 seconds left. Now I'm up +5. I didn't know I was up +5. I just know I'm very, very short on time because the little timer, buzzer, whatever has already sounded. So I was able to trade off the rook here and then start advancing a pawn, but I only have 8 seconds left here. If I'd had another minute, I'm positive I would have won this game because I checked. My opponent got out of check. I checked. That was, I still have a mate in 10 according to this. And then I ran out of time after this move. My opponent was able to move down there and then my clock expired. That little playthrough right there probably lasted longer than the actual moves in the game did because we were moving so quickly. And yes, I know somebody's going to say that if I had just played a longer time control, I wouldn't have run into this situation. But the problem with longer time controls, at least for me at this level, is that my opponent also gets more time. My opponent has just as much time to think of their good moves as I do to think of mine, and this is a lot more fun for me. But in fact, I was proud of myself that I got it down to, a mating sequence here near the end. In fact, according to Stockfish, I had a forced mate as early as move 85 here. Stockfish says it's maybe mate in 13. I only managed 4 more moves in at this point. When my opponent made this mistake, of course, that takes it down to a mate in 11. And when my opponent got out of check this way, I should have come much closer than I did. The problem, of course, is that I only had 5 seconds left, so I did it a little bit more slowly than I should have. And now we have a mate in 6, but I have to check here, which is a fork with the rook. Now, with 3 seconds left, I probably should have been able to find that, but let's go back to the point much earlier than this, at which I hope to learn something. Here, after 12 moves, neither one of us has made a mistake, not even an inaccuracy. My opponent dropped that bishop back because I think I was threatening it with the knight. I developed my last minor piece. My opponent castled, and b4 was my best move, believe it or not. The bishop, of course, is guarding that. I think it would force their bishop to drop back one more, and I did that, and they went forward. So now I have a +1 advantage very early in the middle game. It made sense to me to take there, and I did, and it turns out that that was my best move. Now I'm up 1.2. Now here, I did realize that it was going to be difficult for me to get rid of this pawn because I can't get this pawn out of the way, so I'm never going to be able to hit it from, this direction with the rook. It's on a dark square, so this bishop's never going to be able to hit it. I'm going to have to get it with my dark squared bishop if that pawn ever disappears because I don't have a knight, I don't have a queen. I suppose maybe much later I'll, be able to get my king around there somehow. Once all these other pieces move. The engine thinks I should just ignore it and throw this pawn forward. I was considering dropping the bishop back to its home square and coming this way. But I thought in the time that I did that, my opponent would be able to play their b pawn, and then when I got my bishop over here, they'd be able to play their c pawn, and if I took it, they'd take it, and that pawn would be locked in there. Then I would have to, get my bishop around here trying to get that pawn, but they would defend it with the knight, and then I would never get that front d pawn. But I did notice that the pawn right behind it was undefended, which is why I played bishop to f4. That turns out to be my second best move. The idea, of course, was to get this pawn and then maybe come around in here and get this one. My opponent should have protected it with the rook or dropped the knight back to e8 to defend that pawn. Now, I don't know if this was a mouse slip, misclick or whatever, but my opponent threw their rook a little too far. Maybe that's because they thought this file was going to open up at some point. Like maybe they were planning on pushing this forward and then I would take and they would take and I would take and then they would have a rook on an open file. But I suspect that that was a mouse slip, that they meant to go here. That gives me +2.6, and of course it's if I take that pawn. So now I'm a pawn ahead, but more importantly, I think I'm going to be able to get their front d pawn. Another inaccuracy from my opponent puts me at +3, almost +4. Now at this point, I still haven't even played an inaccuracy. My opponent has 2 inaccuracies and a mistake. It says I should have played b5. I guess if I played b5 that they could drop that back, and then it says I would play e5 and they would have to drop the other knight back. Or I could play them out of order, which is what I did. I played this e5 here to throw that first knight back, and its best move is either knight to e8 or knight to d7. It did play there. But now b5 is an inaccuracy. For some reason, it mattered which order I did those in. I don't know why it matters, but if I had played b5 a turn ago, that would have been best. And wherever they moved this, then this would have worked as well. And it says I then would have put a rook on the e-file. No, I probably would have put the bishop here aiming for that pawn. Probably. But for some reason, because I played e5 first, now b5 is not one of my top 5 moves. It takes us down to +3. That turned out to be okay because my opponent should have just moved their knight, but instead they took, which now I'm up +4. The reason is this right here. A couple of analyses ago, I said something about I'm still not very good at seeing, these bishop moves coming down through here, but I've been trying to look for it ever since I said that, and I saw it this time. Of course, that forks the 2 rooks and the knight. My opponent's best move is to get the knight over here, where the 2 knights would be protecting each other. Because right now, if I take one of the rooks, I'm losing a bishop for it. But if I take the knight, I still have my bishop. And I was paying attention to that because I've made that mistake before. My opponent took this pawn, perhaps thinking that I was going to take one of the rooks and then they would take back and then they would have a passed pawn. Maybe that's what they were thinking. Or if I took here, then they would have a different passed pawn. But I was pretty sure that it would be better to take the free piece than to go up the exchange. And it turns out that that's true. It's my 5th best move to take one of the rooks. Okay, well, I'm glad that I made the correct decision here. I took this. My opponent is supposed to push this past to get their passed pawn. Or take here to get a passed pawn. If they took there, they would have 2 passed pawns, but they would be doubled, so only one of them would really matter. I assume if they took here, then I would... No. Well, if they had taken there, I was going to take it with my bishop. But the engine says at that point I should have put a rook in front of the 2 pawns. And it says if they pushed past, I should take this rook, they would take, and then I would put a rook in front of their passed pawn. But instead, they decided to attack my bishop, which... My bishop was going to go here if they didn't move that pawn. It says that's not actually my best move. My best move is to go to b5, which I guess skewers these 2 pieces. But my second best move is to take the pawn. And they need to come after it immediately. Knight to b6, it says is best. Rook a to c8 wasn't even in their top 5. Now the engine wants me to put this back over here, but I saw an open file to put my rook on. It's not one of my best moves, but it's okay. They finally did put their knight out there, and I maintained a pretty decent advantage for a few more moves. I'm still up slightly on material. I finally put the other rook on the other open file, and my opponent played an inaccuracy, so I'm still up +5, and there's a whole bunch of moves that leave me at +5. Rook to c7, rook to c5, king to g2, rook to e5, or rook to e4. I don't know why I didn't think of rook to e4, because I can challenge that pawn with it. This one, I guess rook to c7 challenges that pawn, so I should have been able to see that. Also, rook's on the 7th, makes sense. Rook to c5, I'm not sure what that does. King to g2, I think I understand. It gets my rook off the back rank in case they ever come down here. Rook to e5, that's just like c5. I'm not sure what either one of those do, but I think I should have been able to see rook to e4 or rook to c7. But guess what I did instead? I played rook to e7. I don't even need to evaluate this blunder or try to figure out what went wrong because that's very elementary. My opponent can just take it. Now, obviously, I must have done that thinking about taking this pawn, but why didn't I try this one? And then if they moved to protect the pawn, then I could have brought this rook over here and it would have been fine, I think. Like if I had played here, it says my opponent's just going to give that pawn up. They're going to put a rook over here behind this pawn or try to sneak the rook in here to get back at this one. And then I would play rook to d8, hoping to trade off rooks with the bishop or something like that. But I don't know. I don't know if they would have seen that or not. That might have been why they moved the rook over in the first place. But if they had gone here, then yeah, rook to c to e7. Okay, that makes a lot more sense. Wait, why did it drop? That's what it said to play. Rook c to e7. Oh no, to move this one over. Oh, well that's much better. I would have done the wrong one. You saw that, right? I would have played here. Wait, my second best move here would be to take that pawn anyway. And they can't take back because if they do, that's mate. So yeah, here I don't need to evaluate the blunder. I didn't know until they took it that was the problem. That tells you maybe I was a little tired, but also that I need a lot more practice. Of course, they only have one move here. My opponent played it, and I realized I was probably lost. But at this point, I was up on time. I was up a minute and a half here. So I decided to keep playing, thinking maybe time would be a factor. I did play my best move, which is the move I should have played on the previous turn, and that allows me to take the pawn. My opponent obviously is still up now. They played one of their better moves. This was not one of my better moves, but I thought maybe I could stop this pawn from coming down. My opponent played their best move. One of my best moves was to get behind this pawn. I thought maybe, maybe I had a chance, even though my opponent is up 2 points of material at this point. And we played on until my opponent blundered here on move 36, right here. And now suddenly it's even, but only one move makes it even, and that's checking here. That would force their king up to g7. That's the only legal move at that point. Then I would check over here behind their king. That would force them to h7. And then I would play rook to d8 right here. I don't know exactly how that makes us drawn. I do know that it would have been a good move. I should have been looking for checks. I had a safe check here because their rook has abandoned the back rank. But I would have known, my bishop's protecting the pawn, right? But I would have known that if I had checked here that they could just get out of check. And I would have known that if I had checked over here that they could just get out of check. And I probably would not have known to come back over here after that. I don't know if that would have been an only move at that point, but I don't know what that would have accomplished. Other than getting the king out of the way of this pawn. That's what that would have accomplished. I think I get that. That is, after all, one of my assets and one of the reasons I've been keeping this bishop here on b3. So maybe getting the king out from in front of it would have been okay, but I don't know what I would have done after that. But I didn't play it. I got behind my own passed pawn because rooks belong behind passed pawns in many cases, just not this case. Okay, we played on for a while with my opponent still having an advantage, and now I'm still up a minute and a half. I played my best move. Was that an only move? No, there were only 2 moves. Anything else led to a mating sequence. I had to go to one of these 2 spots. I did almost go up, but then I realized that their rook could come here. So I did play one of the moves that didn't immediately give away the game. Now, my opponent is supposed to take this pawn with their b rook. I didn't think they were going to take the pawn, even though, because of where I moved my pawn, it's blocked. I thought, if they took that pawn with either rook, yeah, it would be gone, but I have another one. And their knights got out from in front of this one and my rook's behind it. But I guess if they take with the b rook, that lines up both of these here with my f pawn, and I'm in trouble. But they took it with their f rook for some reason. That allows me to push this pawn. Now my opponent is still ahead, and they're in trouble here, but they also have to stop this pawn, right? They can solve both those problems with one move. I'm proud of my opponent for finding that. They spent only 6 seconds realizing they can get this rook out of danger and block the pawn at the same time. I can immediately attack that rook again. It is my best move to play bishop to a4. They backed up, and I still have about a minute and a half time advantage. That was my best move. Now, I have 2 pieces protecting this. They have 2 pieces attacking it. I think they're going to have to bring their knight back. No, it says rook to b4 is their best move to threaten my bishop because my bishop's protecting the pawn. But instead, they threatened my bishop this way. And I had to play to one of these 2 squares, but I didn't. I went here, which doesn't protect that pawn anymore. It allows them to take it. But I guess they saw that they were low on time, and they thought I would keep protecting the pawn. So they played that really quickly. Again, I think they must have been expecting me to just move my knight. So to move my bishop to where it would keep protecting the pawn. And since I didn't, they had already prepared this move and moved it, trying to close the time gap. The time gap is less than a minute now. It is my best move to come up here. I don't know if that's why it was my best move, but the reason I did it is because I thought I could check here and win the knight. My opponent needs to solve that problem by moving their king up, but instead they blundered by going for the rook. And I didn't want to trade my rook off for, one of their rooks right now because I'm still down on material. So I went there and won the knight, like I said. And now we're even, or very, very close to even. My opponent had a bunch of moves that kept us near even, but instead they played that, which gives me this, and I would have won the rook. Oh my goodness. Wow, there was more in this game than I thought there was going to be. But right here, I'm going to say this is where I lost it. I know I was way ahead at the end when I lost on time, but here I was ahead on time, and I could have won that rook. Wow. My bishop's protecting f7, or I could have checked. They would have had to move out of check. I would have won their other rook. I would have had a passed pawn over here. I do have a passed pawn over here, but there would have been nothing in front of it except my rook. Oh my goodness. But I checked here instead. And we stayed even up until about the point that I started this video at, which is just us shuffling these pieces around, and I thought I was doing pretty good here, but as you can see, the time gap is getting less and less. Now I'm only up about 12 seconds at this point. I did pick up an extra pawn, so I have a very slight lead here, but I think where we came into this game was somewhere around move 65 or something like that. Probably around here. And by this point, my opponent was up on time. So yeah, going back to right here, that was definitely a blunder because now nothing's defending that I could have wanted. Well, this I will classify as an intermediate level blunder because it requires seeing 2 moves ahead, right? But the first one, I have to classify that as an amateur beginner blunder right here. Because I had been getting steadily and steadily further ahead through the middle game, and the game review calls this an end game here. I didn't realize this was counted as an end game because we still have 4 heavy pieces on the board. But yeah, this is an elementary level blunder, and even though I did recover after that, I should have never had to. I did not do the blunder check on this move. How long did I spend on it? Wow, I spent 24 seconds on that. That's 3 times longer than my average. If I'm not mistaken, my average in rapid games is about 7 to 10 seconds. I usually say 8 seconds in my head. 8 to 10 seconds should be long enough to think, oh, if I put it there, they can just take it. But I think what must have happened is I must have considered a bunch of other moves, and by the time that I decided on this, I realized that my time had been ticking. So I was obviously aiming at that pawn, but yeah, they can just take it. I think, now that I think about it, one thing I think I was considering here was going all the way down, but I realized if they took, and I took, they would take, I would go down 1, I was up 2 pawns here, but I would only be up 1 pawn after that, right? So I'm glad I didn't do that, but this was worse. All right, well, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.